On the 21st of October 1805, 27 British ships faced 33 enemy vessels in waters off the Spanish coast. The odds were against them, the stakes could not have been higher, and at the helm of the British fleet stood a man who had already defied death more times than any admiral had a right to expect. What unfolded that day would not merely decide the fate of a single battle. It would establish Britain as the undisputed master of the oceans for the next century, forge a legend that still echoes through naval history, and create a hero whose name became synonymous with courage itself. This is the story of how Horatio Nelson turned certain defeat into eternal victory, and how one man's genius transformed Britain from an island nation into the ruler of the waves. The morning mist clung to the waters near Cape Trafalgar, but beneath that veil of uncertainty lay the culmination of years of preparation, sacrifice, and brilliant strategy. To understand the magnitude of what happened that day, we must first journey back to where it all began, to a small rectory in Norfolk, where a boy destined for greatness first drew breath. 29th September, 1758. The village of Burnham Thorpe lay quiet under the autumn sky, its fields golden with harvest, its people going about their daily routines with no knowledge that history was being written in their midst. In the modest rectory, Catherine Nelson cradled her sixth child, a boy she would name Horatio. The Reverend Edmund Nelson looked upon his son with the quiet pride of a man who understood duty, though he could never have imagined the extraordinary path that lay ahead for this infant. The Nelson household was one of genteel poverty. Scholarly pursuits filled their days, books lined their shelves, and moral instruction shaped their conversations. Yet for all their learning and respectability, coin was scarce. 11 children stretched the family's modest resources thin, and young Horatio grew up understanding that advancement in life would come not through inheritance, but through merit, courage, and the favor of those who recognized promise when they saw it. Fortune smiled upon the boy in the form of his uncle, Captain Maurice Suckling. Here was a man who had tasted the salt spray of distant seas, who knew the ways of the Royal Navy, and who possessed the influence to open doors that would otherwise remain forever closed to a country parson's son. When Horatio was barely 12 years old, that crucial connection would change everything. The transformation from village boy to naval officer began with a letter. Captain Suckling had agreed to take his nephew aboard his ship, and with that simple act of family loyalty, he set in motion events that would reshape the maritime world. The boy who had played among Norfolk's quiet lanes would soon learn the harsh realities of life at sea, where storms could kill as easily as enemy cannon, where discipline was measured in lashes, and where a man's worth was proven not by his birth, but by his ability to stand firm when the deck pitched beneath his feet and death whistled overhead. The Royal Navy of the 1770s was a crucible that forged men from boys with ruthless efficiency. Young Horatio learned to tie knots in darkness, to read the wind's message in the set of the sails, to navigate by stars that had guided sailors since time immemorial. More importantly, he learned that leadership was not about commanding from safety, but about standing where the danger was greatest and inspiring others to follow. By 1777, the boy from Burnham Thorpe had become Lieutenant Nelson, though he had barely reached his 19th year. The examination that granted him this rank was meant for men of 20 or more, yet his skill and his uncle's influence had secured this early advancement. He was no longer the parson's son. He was a naval officer, and the sea had claimed him as its own. The West Indies beckoned, those sugar-rich islands where fortunes were made and lives were lost to fever as readily as to enemy action. Nelson sailed into waters where yellow death lurked in every port, where the sun beat down with merciless intensity, and where a young officer could prove his mettle or meet his end far from the green fields of home. Here, in these tropical seas, he would earn his first command, his captain's rank arriving when he was just 20 years old. But the sea demanded its price for such rapid advancement. Malaria seized him with burning fever, dysentery racked his body, and scurvy threatened to rob him of teeth and strength. Each illness should have killed him, yet somehow he survived, as if fate itself had marked him for greater things. These early brushes with mortality taught him a lesson that would serve him well in the years to come. Death was always near, but it was not to be feared. It was simply another element to be navigated, like wind or tide. The attack on San Juan seemed to promise glory but delivered devastation instead. The British force, victorious in battle, found itself almost entirely destroyed by the invisible enemy of tropical disease. Nelson watched good men die not from Spanish steel, but from the fever that claimed them in their sleep. He learned that war was not merely about courage in battle, but about enduring the long periods between fights, about maintaining hope when death seemed to stalk every shadow. When peace came, it brought with it the peculiar challenges of a naval officer without a war to fight. Nelson found himself on half pay, his career seemingly stalled, his future uncertain. He married Frances Nisbet in the Indies, a widow with a son, seeking perhaps the stability that his profession had never offered. Yet even in marriage, the call of duty and the promise of action remained stronger than domestic comfort. The revolution in France changed everything. When King Louis lost his head to the guillotine in January 1793, the crowned heads of Europe shuddered, and Britain found itself once again at war with its ancient enemy across the Channel. For Nelson, those 6 years of enforced peace came to an abrupt end. The Admiralty offered him command of HMS Agamemnon, a 64-gun ship of the line, and with it, a chance to prove that his early promise had not been mere youthful flash. From his home county of Norfolk, Nelson gathered a crew, hand-picking men who shared his understanding that a ship was only as strong as the bonds between those who sailed her. These were not pressed men dragged unwillingly to sea, but volunteers who chose to follow an officer whose reputation for caring for his sailors was already spreading through the fleet. They would need that loyalty in the years to come, for Nelson was not a commander who led from the rear. The Mediterranean became his proving ground, that ancient sea where civilizations had clashed since before the pyramids were built. Here, Napoleon's revolutionary armies were reshaping the map of Europe, and here, Nelson would begin to reshape the nature of naval warfare itself. The conventional wisdom said that fleets should fight in line, ship following ship in orderly formation, trading broadsides until one side or the other could take no more punishment. Nelson had different ideas. He studied his enemy, analyzed their weaknesses, and prepared to throw away the rulebook when the moment demanded it. Innovation would be his weapon, surprise his greatest advantage. The young captain who had survived fever and disease was about to become the admiral who would revolutionize naval tactics. In 1793, off the coast of Corsica, the price of his aggressive leadership became personal. A French shot took the sight from his right eye, yet he remained on deck, blood streaming down his face, continuing to direct the action until victory was secured. 4 years later, at Santa Cruz in Tenerife, a Spanish musket ball shattered his right arm, forcing its amputation in the ship's cockpit without anesthetic, save rum and leather to bite upon. Lesser men might have sought safer assignments after such wounds, might have accepted that they had given enough to king and country. Nelson saw each scar as a badge of honor, each lost limb as proof that he understood the price of victory. His men saw something else. They saw a commander who shared their dangers, who bled as they bled, who asked nothing of them that he would not give himself. The stage was being set for the confrontation that would define not just Nelson's career, but the fate of nations. Across the Mediterranean, a young French general named Napoleon Bonaparte was dreaming of Eastern conquest, of following in the footsteps of Alexander the Great. His eyes turned toward Egypt, toward the ancient land of the pharaohs, where glory and strategic advantage might be won with a single bold stroke. But between Napoleon and his dreams lay the Royal Navy, and increasingly, that navy looked to one man for the kind of victory that could change the course of history. The boy from Norfolk was about to become the weapon that would shatter French naval power forever. The year 1798 would become the turning point, the moment when Nelson's tactical genius would be unleashed upon an unsuspecting enemy. Napoleon's Eastern expedition had set sail with grand ambitions, carrying not just soldiers and cannons, but scholars and scientists who would unlock the secrets of ancient Egypt. Yet, for all his careful planning on land, the young general had made one critical error. He had left his fleet vulnerable, anchored in what he believed was the safety of Aboukir Bay. Admiral François Brouilly d'Aiguillé commanded the French Mediterranean fleet with confidence born of position. 13 ships of the line lay at anchor in the bay, their broadsides facing seaward, their captains certain that no enemy would dare approach through the treacherous shoals that guarded the anchorage. The massive Orient, Brueys' flagship, dominated the center of the line like a floating fortress, her 120 guns a testament to French naval power. But Nelson was already racing toward them across the wine-dark waters, his squadrons spread wide in search formation, every captain understanding that when the enemy was found, there would be no time for lengthy signals or complex maneuvers. The hunt had been long, the French fleet elusive, slipping away from ports just as the British arrived. Yet persistence was rewarded, and when the lookout aboard HMS Zealous spotted the forest of masts in Aboukir Bay, Nelson knew his moment had come. What happened next would be studied in naval academies for generations to come. Conventional wisdom dictated that attacking an anchored fleet was folly, that the defenders held every advantage of position and preparation. Nelson saw only opportunity. The French had anchored close to shore, but not close enough. There was water between their line and the shallows, water deep enough for his ships to navigate if captains possessed the skill and courage to attempt it. Captain Thomas Foley in HMS Goliath led the way, his ship threading between the French line and the shore in a maneuver that caught the enemy completely unprepared. The French guns that might have devastated this approach were unmanned, their crews having assumed no attack could come from that direction. One by one, Nelson's ships followed, each captain understanding without orders what their admiral intended. The French found themselves trapped between two fires, British ships on both sides unleashing broadsides that tore through hulls and rigging with devastating effect. The bay filled with smoke and flame, the thunder of cannon echoing off the Egyptian shore, where Napoleon's army could only watch helplessly as their lifeline to France was severed forever. At the height of the battle, when victory already seemed assured, catastrophe struck the French flagship. The Orient, that mighty symbol of French naval power, erupted in a fireball that lit the night sky for miles. Admiral Brueys died at his post, and with him perished French hopes of maintaining their eastern adventure. The explosion was so tremendous that both fleets fell silent, awed by the terrible spectacle of a ship of the line consumed by her own magazine. When dawn broke over Aboukir Bay, the magnitude of Nelson's victory became clear. Of 13 French ships, only 2 had escaped, limping away to carry news of the disaster to a French government that could hardly believe such complete destruction was possible. Napoleon's army was stranded, cut off from supplies and reinforcement, their dreams of Eastern Empire reduced to ashes floating on the Mediterranean tide. For Nelson, the Nile brought more than tactical triumph. It elevated him from skilled captain to national hero, his name suddenly on every tongue in Britain. Baron Nelson of the Nile became his title, though the man himself was more concerned with the strategic implications of his victory. French naval power in the Mediterranean lay in ruins, their alliance with other powers weakened by this demonstration of British supremacy. Yet personal glory came at a price that extended far beyond the physical wounds of battle. In the aftermath of the Nile, Nelson found himself drawn into the complex web of Mediterranean politics and into the arms of a woman who would change his life forever. Emma Hamilton was no ordinary naval officer's wife. Beautiful, vivacious, and possessed of a past that scandalized proper society, she was the wife of the British envoy to Naples, a woman whose influence extended far beyond the drawing rooms of diplomatic society. Their meeting in Naples was electric, a collision of personalities that would reshape both their lives. Nelson, the hero fresh from his greatest triumph, found in Emma a woman who understood the weight of fame, who could match his passion for life with her own intoxicating presence. What began as admiration became infatuation, and infatuation bloomed into a love that would define the remainder of his days. The affair scandalized London society, but Nelson cared little for the whispers of those who had never faced enemy fire. Emma Hamilton became his refuge from the burdens of command, the one person who could make him forget, if only briefly, the responsibilities that weighed upon his shoulders. Their daughter Horatia, born in 1801, became the center of his world, the child he doted upon with all the tenderness that his public role seldom allowed him to display. Meanwhile, across the Channel, Napoleon had returned from Egypt to seize power in France, transforming himself from general to first consul and eventually to emperor. His dreams of Eastern conquest might have been shattered, but his ambitions for European dominance burned brighter than ever. Britain remained his greatest obstacle, protected by the waters of the English Channel and the wooden walls of the Royal Navy. The French Emperor understood that invasion was impossible while British ships controlled the seas. His admirals had learned painful lessons from the Nile, but Napoleon believed that concentration of force could still achieve what individual skill had failed to accomplish. If French and Spanish fleets could unite, if they could gain even temporary control of the Channel, then his Grande Armée could cross those narrow waters and bring Britain to its knees. In 1805, that plan took shape with frightening clarity. Admiral Villeneuve commanded the French Mediterranean fleet, while Spanish ships added their strength to Napoleon's cause. The strategy was complex but potentially decisive. Draw the British fleet away from European waters, unite the Franco-Spanish squadrons in the Caribbean, then race back to Europe before the British could respond. With the Channel momentarily unguarded, invasion barges could carry French soldiers to English shores. Nelson, now commanding the Mediterranean fleet from his flagship, HMS Victory, recognized the threat immediately. When Villeneuve's ships slipped away from Toulon, the British admiral faced the most crucial decision of his career. His orders were to guard the Mediterranean, to prevent French expansion into those vital waters. Yet every instinct told him that the real danger lay elsewhere, that Villeneuve's destination was far more ambitious than any local objective. Without authorization, without any assurance that he was making the correct choice, Nelson ordered his fleet to follow the French across the Atlantic. It was a decision that could have ended his career in disgrace, a gamble that risked everything on his ability to read his enemy's intentions. For weeks, the two fleets played a deadly game of maritime chess across thousands of miles of ocean, neither quite able to bring the other to decisive battle. The chase took them to the Sugar Islands of the Caribbean, where fortunes were made and empires sustained. Here, among the tropical isles where Nelson had first tasted command as a young man, the fate of Europe hung in the balance. Yet Villeneuve proved elusive, always just beyond reach, always threatening to escape and fulfill Napoleon's grand design. When the French admiral finally turned back toward Europe, Nelson was ready. The long pursuit had served its purpose, preventing the concentration of enemy force that Napoleon required. Now, as both fleets raced back across the Atlantic, the stage was set for the confrontation that would decide whether Britain would remain free or fall beneath the eagles of French dominion. The summer of 1805 found Europe balanced on a knife's edge. Napoleon's empire stretched from the Atlantic to the borders of Russia, his eagles casting shadows over ancient kingdoms that had bent the knee to French ambition. Yet Britain remained defiant, her shores protected by the narrow waters of the Channel and the vigilance of her wooden walls. The emperor understood that his continental dominance meant nothing while his greatest enemy controlled the seas, and so his admirals prepared for the gamble that would either crown him master of the world or shatter his dreams forever. Admiral Pierre-Charles Villeneuve commanded the combined Franco-Spanish fleet with the weight of empire upon his shoulders. A competent officer who had survived the carnage of the Nile, he understood better than most the price of facing Nelson in battle. Yet Napoleon's orders left no room for caution. The fleet must unite, must gain control of the Channel, must clear the path for invasion. The emperor's impatience crackled through every dispatch, each message a reminder that failure would mean disgrace or worse. As autumn painted the leaves of England in shades of gold and crimson, the two fleets converged on waters that would soon run red with blood. Villeneuve's ships sought refuge in the Spanish port of Cadiz, hoping to await reinforcement, or perhaps to avoid the confrontation that seemed increasingly inevitable. But Nelson would not grant them that luxury. His blockade tightened like a noose, 27 British ships patrolling the approaches with the patience of hunters who knew their quarry must eventually emerge. Aboard HMS Victory, Nelson walked the quarterdeck with the measured pace of a man who had accepted his fate. The years of warfare had marked him, the missing arm and blind eye testament to battles won at terrible cost. Yet his mind remained sharp as a blade, calculating angles of approach, studying wind patterns, preparing for the moment when theory would give way to the thunder of guns. His captains gathered around the great cabin table as October winds howled through the rigging above. Here, in the swaying lamplight, Nelson revealed the plan that would revolutionize naval warfare forever. No more would British fleets fight in the traditional line, trading broadside for broadside in gentlemanly fashion. Instead, they would strike like a hammer, driving through the enemy formation in 2 columns, cutting the Franco-Spanish line into manageable segments that superior British gunnery could destroy piecemeal. Captain Thomas Hardy listened with the attention of a man who had sailed with Nelson through years of triumph and storm. Around the table sat the finest commanders in the Royal Navy, men whose names would echo through history. Collingwood, who would lead the southern column; Blackwood, whose frigates would carry messages through the smoke of battle. Each understood that conventional wisdom was being thrown aside, that their admiral was asking them to trust in tactics that had never been tested on such a scale. The plan was audacious beyond measure. Instead of the careful maneuvering that had characterized fleet actions for generations, Nelson proposed to drive straight at the enemy line, accepting terrible punishment during the approach in exchange for the devastating close-range combat that would follow. It was a strategy that depended entirely on the superior training and morale of British crews, on their ability to maintain discipline under fire while their ships were torn apart around them. Yet there was method in this apparent madness. Nelson had studied his enemies, understood their weaknesses as well as their strengths. French and Spanish ships were often magnificent vessels, their guns potentially devastating, but their crews lacked the constant practice that made British gunners the finest in the world. In close combat, where rapid fire and accurate aim mattered more than the theoretical weight of broadside, British superiority would tell. The waiting was perhaps the hardest part. Day after day, the British fleet maintained its watch off Cadiz, signals flashing between ships, supplies transferred in the rolling swells, men cleaning guns that might soon speak with voices of thunder. Nelson used these weeks to perfect every detail, ensuring that when the moment came, every captain would know his role without need for complex signals that smoke might obscure. In the great cabin of victory, surrounded by charts and dispatches, Nelson penned letters that revealed the man beneath the legend. To Emma Hamilton, he wrote of love and longing, of hopes that they might find peace together when the war finally ended. To his beloved Horatio, still a child, he sent words of affection that would have to serve if he did not return. Each letter was a small act of preparation, a settling of accounts before the final reckoning. The intelligence that reached the British fleet on the 20th of October carried news that set hearts racing. Villeneuve was preparing to sail, his ships taking on supplies and ammunition, their crews making ready for sea. Napoleon's fury at his admiral's delays had finally forced the issue. The combined fleet would emerge from Cadiz, and Nelson would have his battle at last. That evening, as the sun dipped toward the western horizon, British lookouts reported the enemy in motion. 33 ships of the line were forming up beyond the harbor mouth, their flags flying in defiance of the blockading squadron. The sight that had haunted Nelson's dreams for months was finally becoming reality. Tomorrow would bring the confrontation that both sides had prepared for, the collision that would determine whether Napoleon's eagles would soar over London or whether Britannia would continue to rule the waves. The night passed slowly for both fleets. In the British ships, men checked their weapons one final time, wrote last letters home, and tried to find sleep that might be their last. Chaplains moved through the gun decks, offering comfort to those who sought it, while others found solace in rum or in the quiet companionship of messmates who had shared years of danger and triumph. From the smoke and thunder of that October afternoon emerged a legend that would outlive empires. Nelson's tactical genius had shattered the combined fleet, captured 22 enemy ships without losing a single British vessel, and ended Napoleon's dreams of invasion forever. Though the admiral fell at the moment of triumph, his sacrifice secured Britain's dominion over the seas for the next century. The boy from Norfolk had become immortal, proving that courage, innovation, and unwavering duty could change the course of history itself.